All right, well, just minutes ago, the House voted to extend tax cuts for the middle class. The cuts are part of a much bigger debate, though, on how to cut the budget deficit, now near a staggering $14 trillion. We tackle both issues now in our new segment. It is called The Task Force. James Galbraith is former executive director of the Joint Economic Committee for some of those same years, now economics professor at the University of Texas out in Austin. Also with us in studio with Matt and myself, Peter Coy, economics editor of Bloomberg Businessweek. And joining us soon will also be David Stockman, who served as budget director in the Reagan White House. Jamie, let's kick it off with you. So many issues to talk about. First of all, the issue of tax cuts. I mean, where do we go on this front in your view?
Well, I'm glad to hear about the House vote. And I think the president should hang tough on that position. He should not, at this point, give away the Republican position so long as we are seeing a real danger to Social Security and Medicare, which has also got to be part of this discussion. So if you went with the entire extension of the Bush tax cuts, you're creating such a hole that the discourse will move very rapidly to the kinds of harsh cuts in important social programs that are in the Deficit Commission's report, and that I think would be very damaging to a large part of our society and our economy.
I want to ask you about Social Security. You say that it's in danger. We talked to an economist yesterday who points out that when Social Security came into existence, you didn't get it till 64 or 65, and the average life expectancy at the time was 58. Do you think that we've come to rely too much on Social Security, or should there be a change? Should the age limit be raised?
Social Security is a huge success. I mean, one of the reasons why the life expectancy went up is that people got regular payments, and so they were able to eat and take care of themselves much longer than they could do in the old days. No, I don't think the retirement age should be raised. The retirement age, two-thirds of the Social Security recipients, I think, actually take early retirement, and raising that age from 65, 66 to 69 is simply a benefit cut for everybody in that position. And that's the lower half, the lower two-thirds of the workforce who do that. So it really is just a disguised benefit cut targeted at the least well-paid workers. And that's very bad policy in my view.
Jamie, this is Peter Coy. We've talked before. You focus on the short term and how it will be a bad thing now to be raising taxes or cutting spending because of the weak economy. But what about the longer term? What about the kind of time frame that's being talked about by the budget deficit reduction commissions? Wouldn't it be a problem if nothing were done in the long term about bringing the budget into balance?
We know nothing reliable about the long term. What we do know is that the baseline forecasts on which all of this discussion is founded are utterly unreliable. They're internally inconsistent, and the GNP would not be the same under these different plans. So all of these forecasts on which the argument is based are almost totally artificial.
All right, I want to bring...
From that point of view...
Speaking of that...
David Stockman, I know you've been racing to get here. Thank you so much. We want to bring you into this. We're talking about the tax cuts. The House voted to extend the tax cuts for the middle class just moments ago. Caught your breath? Are you okay?
I'm fine.
Okay. Yeah. So where are you on this tax cut issue? I mean, at this point, can we even afford to have any kind of tax cuts?
I don't think so at all. I think extending the tax cuts under the fiscal circumstance we're in is wrong. What we're basically doing is taking Uncle Sam's credit card and giving it to the middle class and the upper class so they can go out and buy some more iPads or some more Coach bags or some more junk from Home Depot. The fact is, we can't heal the economy by piling more debt on Uncle Sam, because the risk in the bond market is just as significant as the risk in the macroeconomy. So therefore, we're playing with fire if we think somehow we can generate spending in the macroeconomy without running huge risks that we're not going to be able to finance $1.3 trillion of debt year after year.
It's so interesting to hear you say this, right? Because the last time we did an incredible amount of spending and ran deficits way up was when you were working with President Reagan. And at the time, interest rates were much higher. The bond vigilantes were getting ready for action. I mean, it worked so well then. What has changed your mind
Because
on
then
this?
we had a real chairman of the Federal Reserve, okay? Then we had Volcker. Volcker was not going to print money and basically stir up an artificial economy. Today we have Helicopter Ben. All the debt that the Treasury is issuing each month, $100 billion, is being bought across the street by the Fed with its big fat POMO bid, buying in $100 billion. Now the problem is,
open mouth operations.
What happens when the Fed's POMO bid disappears from the market? And the fast traders and the smart guys start selling the bond because the Fed's bid is gone. Who's going to buy all this debt?
By the way, do you expect that to happen at some point? Do you expect...
I think it's beginning to happen already. It's not simply when they actually terminate QE2, which they've got a few months left. It's when they indicate they're going to, because that will be a signal to the world market that the big bid is out of the market, and that I think the rest of the world is going to want a lot higher interest rate to absorb or take on the sovereign debt of a country that can't even get its act together.
Jamie, weigh in on what David's been saying. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think David is a man of principle, and I admire him for that. But on the question of the bond market, I really fundamentally disagree. The United States bond market is not, in my judgment, in any significant danger, and the United States government is not going to run into funding difficulties. I think this is a complete red herring. The experience in Europe right now, and particularly in the small countries of Europe, is based upon the vulnerabilities of the euro system and the particular vulnerabilities of small countries and their debts to the speculative markets. The United States Treasury market is just vast, and even if there were difficulties at the long end, there's absolutely no reason why the Treasury needs to issue long bonds. It can fund itself at the short end of the market as much as it likes. The problem that we have here is that we have to come up with practical ways to make our economy recover in the short run. When we do that, tax revenues will rise, and these debt-to-GDP ratios and deficit ratios will decline on their own. But they're really fundamental issues of the problems of the private debt in the household sector, the problems of the banking sector that are going to have to be addressed before that happens. And the discussion of the deficit per se is a distraction, in my view, from that.
You know what? I want to ask David what you think of the Laffer curve. It's something that seems a lot of people are talking about as if it had been debunked. But
well, in theory, obviously, 100% tax rate, you're going to get no revenue, and at zero, you won't either. The problem is, in the real world, you're somewhere in between, and circumstances vary from early 1980s, when it was morning again in America. We hadn't sent all of our industry offshore abroad. We didn't have a huge debt on our balance sheet, public or private. And in those circumstances, incentivizing activity, entrepreneurial activity, and so forth, probably we could afford. This is 30 years later. We've basically buried the economy, public and private, in debt. And I beg to disagree with Professor Galbraith. The deficit is a huge problem.
Peter, I want to bring you into this because you're kind of looking at the short versus long-term issues of the deficit.
Yeah, I just have a question for Mr. Stockman. The short-term budget deficit versus the long-term thing that the Deficit Reduction Commission is focusing on. Japan in 1998 fell back into a slump when they tried to raise value-added taxes abruptly to try to, they thought, balance the budget. It actually turned out to be a problem. Is there a chance that if we move too quickly to shrink the budget deficit, that will cause the same thing to happen?
No, I don't think so, for two reasons. One, the deficit that I'm talking about in 2011 through 2015 assumes the recovery's already happened. It's built in. Huge increase in employment, 13 million jobs, unemployment down to 5.5%, real growth 3 or 4%, nominal growth 5%. It's all built into the numbers, and you still have a 1.2 trillion deficit each year, $6 trillion in total over the next 5 years. We're not going to grow our way out of it. It'll probably be worse when we look at the real economy. Second, Japan spent 20 years burying itself in debt, got its debt up to 190% of GDP, and the argument that they stopped spending and borrowing too soon, I think, doesn't even begin to measure up to the facts. It didn't work. Keynesianism doesn't work. Borrow and spend doesn't work. It hasn't worked here. It hasn't worked in Japan. And for the life of me, why the Republicans in Congress would go along with what I call Chamber of Commerce Keynesianism, give everybody a tax cut by, tapping Uncle Sam's credit card, I don't understand. But that's where we are today, and that's why I think the bond market sooner or later is going to figure it out. Both parties are the free lunch parties, and we're going to be in big trouble, I think, in a short period of time.
Jamie, what do you think about that? I mean, Keynesianism doesn't work. What do you say?
Well, David made a very important point right at the beginning when he said that the current numbers assume a full recovery from the current slump in a very short period of time. And I think that assumption is almost completely implausible. So we are going to be faced with a stagnant economy and very high unemployment for a long period to come. And our first priority, I think what you said earlier was exactly right, Peter, that our first priority should be to deal with that question. What will happen in the long run is something that we can address when we have clarity about the condition of the economy today. And we have two enormous problems. One of them is unemployment and underemployment, and the other one is household debt and the slump in housing values. And those things are going to stand as obstacles to a strong and sustained recovery unless we deal with them. Talking now about what we should be doing with Social Security 25 years from now, to me, makes no sense at all. The country can, and the Congress can very well decide what to do in 10 or 15 years when we're closer to that situation. And the only reason we would act sooner is this fear about the bond market, for which there is no actual evidence in the behavior of interest rates.
Gentlemen, I got to say thank you. We really appreciate you finding some time for us to talk about what to do with taxes and the deficit. They're tough issues. James Galbraith and also David Stockman and our own Peter Coy. Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.